Welcome to all our viewers in India and around the world. You're watching Defense Dynamics and I'm Danveer Singh coming to you from New Delhi. On this episode, we will talk about India's defense diplomacy, industrial muscle and nuclear deterrent, all moving forward at the same time. Firstly, the Army Chief General Upendra Dwivedi's high-level engagements in Australia. What does this visit signal about India's expanding land force footprint in the Indo-Pacific? Is New Delhi quietly recalibrating its military geography beyond the Himalayas? Then, a major strategic signal from French President Emmanuel Macron. Could Rafale fighter jets soon be manufactured in India? What would co-production mean for India's aerospace ecosystem, technology transfer, and long-term combat air power ambitions? Also, beneath the oceans, India strengthens its ultimate deterrent. INS Aridaman, India's third nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine, is set for induction. How does this reinforce India's second strike capability and nuclear triad in an increasingly unstable region? And finally, in my take, we talk about the Persian Gulf escalation as US-Iran shadow war expands. So it is diplomacy, industrial power, strategic deterrence, geopolitics and much more. But first, the global defense headlines. The Indian Air Force is set to conduct exercise Vayu Shakti 2026 starting from February 27th at the Pokhran Air-to-Ground Range, Jaisalmer, anchored on the Indian Air Force's core value, Achuk, Abhedya or Sateek. The exercise will showcase Indian Air Force's operational capability, combat readiness and precision strike prowess. The 16th edition of Exercise Vajra Prahar 2026 between the Indian Army and the United States Army began on Tuesday at Special Forces Training School at Baklo, Himachal Pradesh. The 21 days exercise aims to enhance interoperability, strengthen defense cooperation, and refine special operations skills in mountainous terrain. The opening ceremony of 7th edition of Joint Military Exercise Dharma Guardian 2026 between India and Japan was held on Tuesday at the Foreign Training Node in Chaubatia, Uttarakhand. The exercise is scheduled from February 24th to March 9. This exercise seeks to further enhance interoperability and deepen professional cooperation between the two armies. An Indian defense delegation led by Joint Secretary Amitabh Prasad called on Kenya's Chief of Defense Force General Charles Kahariri and Principal Secretary for Defense Dr. Patrick Mariru. The delegation briefed them on key outcomes of 4th India-Kenya Joint Defense Coordination Committee meeting. Discussions focused on expanding and deepening India-Kenya defense cooperation. Australia has taken another step along the AUKUS pathway with the arrival of the UK Royal Navy's Astute-class submarine HMS Anson and HMAS Stirling. HMS Anson will become the first UK nuclear-powered attack submarine to undergo maintenance activities on the Australian soil. Fincantieri has held a launch ceremony for Ugolino Vivaldi P440, the first of the 4 next-generation offshore patrol vessels being built for Italian Navy. The vessels are part of a program assigned to Orizzonte Sistemi Navali, a joint venture between Fincantieri and Leonardo by Italy's Naval Armament Directorate. Sweden's Defense Material Administration has ordered 8 Rheinmetall Sea Snake 30 into 173 caliber automatic anti-aircraft gun system for Swedish Navy's Combat Boat 90. This marks the first Sea Snake 30 order by a NATO country. India's Indo-Pacific strategy is no longer naval-centric. It is now visibly tri-services and increasingly army-driven. During his visit to Australia from February 16th to the 19th, Army Chief General Upendra Dwivedi held extensive discussions with senior Australian defence leadership to review bilateral military cooperation, expanding army-to-army engagements. This visit marks a deeper alignment between two key Indo-Pacific democracies. General Upendra Dwivedi's visit to Australia comes at a time when the Indo-Pacific security environment is undergoing structural stress. In Canberra, far from Himalayan frontier, India's strategic geography is quietly expanding. When General Upendra Dwivedi met Australia's senior defence leadership, the message was subtle but unmistakable. The Indo-Pacific is no longer just a maritime conversation. India and Australia elevated ties to a comprehensive strategic partnership in year 2020. Much of the focus since then has been maritime, especially within the Quad framework. But the Army's dimension is now expanding through exercise Austra-Hind, officers training exchanges, counter-terror and special forces cooperation, cyber and information warfare dialogue, and joint operational planning concepts. For years, India and Australia built their security partnership around naval cooperation, Quad summits, Malabar exercises, maritime domain awareness, but today the land dimension is coming into sharper focus. Exercise Austra-Hind is evolving. Special forces exchanges are deepening, military education pipelines are widening, cyber and information warfare conversations are expanding. Why does this matter? This is because land warfare in the Indo-Pacific is no longer hypothetical. From grey zone operations to island defense strategies and hybrid conflicts, militaries are preparing for contingencies that combine maritime and land power. India brings high-altitude warfare experience, counter-insurgency depth, and large-scale mobilization capability, while Australia brings amphibious operations expertise, expeditionary force design, and integration with Western military doctrines. This convergence increases interoperability without formal alliance obligations. This is strategic alignment and not alliance politics. What we are witnessing here is not just a courtesy military visit. It's the widening of India's strategic map. For decades, India's army thinking was largely continental, focused on its western and northern borders. But the Indo-Pacific reality is changing that orientation. Land forces are no longer confined to territorial defense. They are becoming instruments of regional stabilization and coalition readiness. The India-Australia Army engagement signals three things. First, interoperability is being institutionalized, not improvised during the crisis. Second, India is preparing for multi-domain contingencies that extend beyond the Himalayas. Third, democratic middle powers are building flexible partnerships without entering formal alliances. In an era of grey zone warfare and contested maritime spaces, land power still matters, especially for island security, logistic hubs, and expeditionary reinforcements. India is not abandoning its continental priorities, it is expanding its strategic horizon, and that expansion is deliberate.
During his visit to Australia, India's Army Chief General Upendra Dwivedi met Admiral David Johnson and Vice Admiral Justin Jones to strengthen joint operational architecture and expand exercise Austra-Hind. The focus was clear: deeper interoperability, stronger special forces cooperation, and structured cyber coordination. This marks a shift from largely maritime engagement to serious land domain alignment. In a stressed Indo-Pacific security environment, these army-to-army ties shows how democratic middle powers are reinforcing regional stability without entering formal alliances.
This is not a treaty, it is something more flexible, strategic convergence. In an Indo-Pacific marked by uncertainty, two democracies are quietly building operational familiarity. And sometimes familiarity itself is a deterrence. From Canberra to New Delhi, the message is clear. India's land power is now part of its Indo-Pacific calculus. For years, India has purchased advanced fighter aircrafts. Now it may begin producing them as well in partnership. French President Emmanuel Macron has indicated that Rafale fighter jets could be manufactured in India, a development that could significantly deepen India-France defense ties. If implemented meaningfully, this could transform India's aerospace ecosystem. The Rafale once symbolized a purchase, a capability-filled gap. Now it may symbolize something far larger. When French President Emmanuel Macron signaled that Rafale jets could be manufactured in India, it hinted at the transformation from buyer to builder. Built by Dassault Aviation, the Rafale is already central to India's air power matrix. In the skies and soon aboard the aircraft carriers. But the production in India changes that equation. It means Indian engineers working on advanced composites, Indian technicians integrating avionics, Indian suppliers entering global aerospace chains. It means skill transferred, not just platforms delivered. For France, India is a trusted strategic partner beyond alliance politics. For India, France represents reliability without geopolitical conditionality. If this vision materializes, Rafale will not just be flown by India, it will be built in India. And that shift from squadron induction to industrial participation could shape the next generation of Indian combat aviation. The Rafale manufactured by Dassault Aviation currently serves with the Indian Air Force and soon it will be operated by the Indian Navy. Rafale Marine variant, as we know, has already been selected for the Indian aircraft carriers. A production line in India could include local assembly of airframes, greater component manufacturing, technology transfer in avionics, integration of Indian weapon system, participation of Indian private defense players. Strategic implications would involve industrial sovereignty, which means reduced long-term dependence, skill transfer, enhancing aerospace engineering base, export potential. India could soon become a regional production hub, and AMCA synergy, which means experience feeds into indigenous fifth-generation development.
After approving 114 additional Rafale fighter jets, India may now move toward large-scale co-production. French President Emmanuel Macron confirmed that manufacturing could take place in India, possibility at the Salt Reliance Aerospace Limited in Nagpur or Tata's Hyderabad facility. Nearly 96 aircraft are expected to be built locally from 28 to 29 under a deal estimated at $36 to $40 billion, with technology transfer covering airframes, avionics, and indigenous weapons integration. This goes beyond procurement. The real test now is, can India absorb deep technology and convert this partnership into a true strategic autonomy?
The Rafale story may now enter its most consequential phase, industrial partnership. But there is a big question. Can India move from buyer to builder? If production shifts to Indian soil at scale, this is not about screwdriver assembly. This is about technology absorption, supply chain localization, private sector integration, and strategic autonomy. For decades, India has depended on foreign fighter production lines. Now imagine Indian engineers assembling advanced frames. Imagine avionics integration happening in Indian facilities. Imagine India becoming an export hub. For France, India is not just a market, it's a trusted strategic counterweight in the Indo-Pacific. For India, France is a defense partner without political conditionality. For France, India is the most trusted defense partner outside NATO framework. For India, France offers reliability without political conditionality. This is not just procurement, it's a strategic co-development architecture. This is not transactional, this is structural. Once Rafale production truly shifts to Indian soil at scale, this will not just be a manufacturing story, it will be a strategic turning point. Because aerospace capability is not about assembling aircraft, it's about absorbing technology, mastering system integration, building supply chains, and creating generational expertise. For years, India has debated defense indigenization. This is where debate meets reality. Once implemented, Rafale co-production could strengthen India's private aerospace sector, reduce life cycle dependency, improve operational readiness, accelerate indigenous next-generation fighter development. But the real question is execution. Will India negotiate deep technology transfer? Will the ecosystem absorb this opportunity? Will bureaucratic inertia dilute strategic momentum? Because co-production without capability absorption is symbolism. And symbolism does not build air power. This is a test of India's defense industrial maturity.
The real debate now is simple. Will India seize this moment or dilute it in bureaucracy? And I have just no doubt whatsoever that it will execute it very well, simply because the Rafale production in India would reshape India's aerospace trajectory and strengthen the foundation for next generation indigenous platforms. India's nuclear doctrine rests on credible minimum deterrence and assured second strike capability. That second strike must survive, and that is where nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines come in. INS Aridaman, India's third SSBN, is now set for induction.
In nuclear strategy, survival is strength, visibility is vulnerability, and silence is power. INS Aridaman, India's third nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine, is set for induction, and its importance cannot be overstated. Unlike fighter jets or missile tests, the SSBN does not seek attention. It seeks invisibility. Because of nuclear doctrine, credibility depends on assured second strike. Land-based missiles can be targeted. Air bases can be preempted. But submarine, hidden deep under the ocean, guarantees retaliation. Aridaman carries improved endurance, greater missile capacity, and deployment capability for long-range K-4 submarine-launched ballistic missiles. INS Aridaman is part of India's Arihant-class nuclear ballistic missile submarine program under the Advanced Technology Vessel Initiative. Compared to earlier platforms like INS Arihant, Aridaman is to have larger displacement, improved reactor endurance, greater missile load capacity, and ability to deploy K-4 submarine-launched ballistic missiles. The K-4 missiles reportedly have a long range exceeding beyond 3,000 kilometers, which allows India to hold adversaries' strategic assets at risk from secure sea positions. Why does this matter? Because land-based missiles can be targeted, air bases can be struck, but submerged nuclear submarine is an ultimate guarantor of retaliation. With Aridaman's induction, India strengthens the sea leg of nuclear triad, strategic stability improves, deterrence capability deepens. In a region where nuclear arsenals are expanding and delivery systems are modernizing, the survivability is everything. What does that mean strategically? It means survivability,
It means deterrence credibility. It means stability, even in worst case scenarios. In a region where nuclear capabilities are expanding rapidly, sea-based deterrence is no longer optional, it is essential. INS Aridaman is not about aggression, it is about ensuring that no adversary ever miscalculates. And in nuclear strategy, preventing miscalculation is everything. INS Aridaman represents the most serious layer of national security, the layer that prevents catastrophic war. Nuclear deterrence is not about numbers, it's about survivability. A credible second strike ensures that no adversary calculates that a first strike can succeed. With multiple SSBNs, India moves closer to sustained at sea deterrence, the gold standard of nuclear stability. This enhances strategic credibility not through aggression but through assurance. In a region where China and Pakistan are modernizing their nuclear delivery systems, sea-based deterrence becomes the stabilizing variable.
INS Aridaman, India's third Arihant-class nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine, has completed sea trials and is expected to be inducted in April to May 2026. With greater displacement and K-4 missiles exceeding 3,000 kilometers in range, it strengthens the sea-based leg of India's nuclear triad. Equipped with indigenous sonar systems like the integrated submarine sonar and enhanced stealth features, it significantly improves survivability. In a region where China and Pakistan are modernizing their nuclear capabilities, Aridaman reinforces credible second strike deterrence in line with India's no first use doctrine.
Silent, strategic, survivable. INS Aridaman reinforces India's long-term nuclear posture beneath the oceans. INS Aridaman may not be visible in public discourse, but in strategic terms, it is one of the most consequential additions to India's defense postures in recent years, because deterrence, when credible, prevents war before it begins. Today, everyone is asking, are the United States and Iran heading towards an open conflict? What are we witnessing between Washington and Tehran is not just diplomatic frustration, it's a slow drift towards confrontation. Nuclear talks, partly direct and partly mediated, continue to be informal but not in substance. Key disputes over enrichment, missiles and sanctions remain unresolved. Diplomacy is alive in name, stalled in reality. Meanwhile, the United States has launched its largest military build-up in years. Carriers, fighters, missile defense, signaling pressure and preparing options beyond talks. Iran is responding with asymmetric warnings, military drills in the Strait of Hormuz, threats to target foreign bases and firm declaration that it will defend its nuclear rights. The result, diplomacy is shrinking, deterrence is expanding and the risk of escalation is rising. So what has changed? Haven't there been talks? Well, talks have existed, they are continuing, but trust doesn't. As negotiators debate enrichment and sanctions, the United States reinforces the region with carriers, strike assets and missile defenses. That's not a routine diplomacy. That's deterrence with teeth. This is a strategic collision. Washington signals military options if Iran refuses to yield, while Tehran, under Ayatollah Khamenei's hardened stance, rejects demands it sees as surrender. The real danger is disconnect. Diplomacy moves slowly, military posture builds momentum. When forces are in place and plans are being drawn, contingency begins to outweigh conversation and escalation becomes easier than compromise. And how is Iran responding? Not by stepping back. Iran is signaling through military drills, proxy networks and strategic geography, especially around critical choke points like the Strait of Hormuz. Tehran is making it clear, pressure will be met with pressure. So what's the real risk? Miscalculation. When forces are forward deployed and red lines are getting blurred, a single strike, even unintended, can escalate rapidly. For the world, the cost of miscalculation is immense, not just in Middle East geopolitics, but in global economic and security terms. With oil markets already sensitive, with regional actors like Israel and Gulf states anticipating possible conflict, and with public rhetoric hardened on both the sides, we are not watching a distant negotiation table. We are watching a tinderbox where the temperature is rising faster than the diplomacy is advancing. So here is the stark truth. The slide towards conflict today isn't accidental, it isn't random, it is the product of military buildup overtaking diplomatic space. And once that happens, the risk shifts from can we talk to can we control the fallout? And that's the real question playing out between Washington and Tehran tonight. And the answer will shape the regional stability for years to come. So the bottom line is that the United States and Iran are not at war, but they are drifting in that direction. Military signaling is accelerating, diplomacy is stalling, forward deployments, nuclear thresholds, proxy strikes, these are escalation triggers. The danger isn't a planned war, it's shrinking diplomatic space as military options expand. When deterrence turns into theater and dialogue becomes ritual, miscalculation becomes inevitable. And history shows us very clearly that conflicts rarely begin with dramatic announcements. They begin when leaders start to believe that escalation can be controlled. Right now, both Washington and Tehran believe they are managing the risk well. The question is, for how long? And that is the strategic bottom line. This episode's stories reflect three layers of India's defense transformation: expanding military diplomacy in the Indo-Pacific, industrial deepening with trusted partners, and strengthening the strategic deterrence. India is not merely modernizing, it is restructuring its strategic architecture. That's all for this week on Defense Dynamics. Share your thoughts with #DD with See you next week. Stay informed, stay strategic. Goodbye and take care.